So, welcome in. Welcome to today's deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, and we are talking directly to you today, our perpetually curious listener. Because today's mission is, it's a big one.
It really is.
We are unpacking a single, incredibly rich source document today. It's called The Intellectual Soul, a history of higher education in Cuba.
Right.
And we're going to trace this massive 300-year-old project, basically looking at how Cuban education was built as this intellectual chassis.
I love that term.
Yeah, it's like a sovereign defensive wall, protecting national identity from external manipulation. And the crazy thing is the whole thing relies entirely on teachers and students as the actual protagonists.
Exactly.
But I mean, before we even get into the history, I want to tease a concept that's going to come up a lot today, and that's thinking friction.
Oh, yeah. That is crucial.
Because even today, right, in our modern age with AI and endless data, true learning actually requires the human effort to, doubt and analyze. It requires friction.
It does. Without that friction, you're not learning. You're just passively consuming.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this. Think about building a nation's identity like building a house.
Okay.
But instead of bricks, this foundation is built entirely on the right of the individual to actually access and question knowledge.
That's a perfect way to look at it, because what we're going to observe here is the evolution of two very objective things: pedagogical access and professional formation.
Right.
We're looking at these as profound humanistic milestones. It's a very objective history of how the mind of a nation was structurally transformed, right up until the dawn of the 21st century.
So to understand the construction of this intellectual chassis, we really have to look at what it was built to replace, right?
Yes.
Which is what the sources call the original elite garden.
Right, the elite garden. So we need to drop all the way back into the year 1728.
Wow. Okay, 1728.
Yeah, this is the founding of the Royal and Pontifical University of St. Jerome by Dominican friars.
And this wasn't exactly a hub of free thinking, was it?
Oh, no, not at all. They used a strictly dogmatic Aristotelian Thomistic approach.
Which basically means what, practically speaking?
It means rote memorization. Theology was placed entirely above any sort of empirical experimentation. If you asked a question, the answer was just a revealed truth.
Wow.
And crucial detail here, everything was taught in strict Latin.
Exclusively Latin.
Exclusively. So because of this highly limited, walled-off curriculum, wealthy families who actually wanted practical knowledge didn't stay. They primarily went abroad to Mexico or Santo Domingo or Spain to actually learn.
Wait, so how does a nation build a unified identity when its absolute smartest minds are essentially forced to leave just to get a practical education?
Well, they couldn't. That was the point.
It's like the use of Latin and the strict memorization, it acts like a linguistic vault.
Yes.
A vault designed specifically to keep the general public out of the garden of knowledge.
What's fascinating here is that your analogy is spot on. This complete lack of thinking friction, where students are just repeating revealed truths in a dead language, that was the ultimate tool of colonial control.
Because if you can't question it, you can't fight it.
Exactly. There was absolutely zero intellectual sovereignty because there was no critical thinking happening.
But obviously things change. I mean, you can't run a booming 19th century economy on memorized Latin.
No, you really can't.
Because by the 1800s, Cuba is driven by massive sugar production and global trade. The nation desperately needed real-world problem solvers.
Right. They needed engineers. They needed doctors.
The shift actually comes from outside the traditional university. It enters through the seminaries, like San Carlos and San Basilio.
Yeah, and this brings us to a pivotal protagonist in the source text, Father Felix Varela.
Father Varela.
Yes. He completely changes the game. He brings in the ideas of Descartes, Locke, Newton.
Actual experimental science and philosophy.
Exactly. But crucially, and this is the big shift, he begins teaching philosophy and constitutional law in Spanish.
Instead of Latin.
Yes, instead of Latin.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because I look at Father Varela's language switch kind of like a modern computer programmer deciding to open source their software.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right. Because by switching to Spanish, the language people actually spoke, Varela made knowledge accessible to the people. He basically open-sourced critical thinking.
He did.
He weaponized education for collective freedom.
And that is really the birth of what the sources call the liberation model.
The liberation model.
Right. And it redefines the role of the maestro, the teacher. The teacher becomes the architect of identity.
Wow.
And we have to stress this was not some top-down government initiative. This was active human resistance against a dogmatic colonial model.
It was dangerous work.
Very. But it proved that knowledge is only really valuable when it's understood and applied by the individual.
Yeah. So, okay, what happens when a whole generation gets raised on this open-sourced critical thinking, and then they clash with an authoritarian system?
Well, the friction becomes physical.
Right, because as we move into the 20th century, the university actually physically moves to the Colina Universitaria, the University Hill.
Yes, and figures like Enrique José Varona step up to really modernize the curriculum.
But the sources really focus heavily on the students here, specifically their visceral resistance to corruption.
It's a dark part of the history, but an essential one. We have to talk about the 1871 execution of 8 medical students by the Spanish government.
8 innocent medical students.
Innocent students, yes. Executed simply to send a message of terror. And that tragic event sparked generations of subsequent student resistance.
Like Julio Emela and José A. Echevarria.
Exactly. Young people who fought fiercely against successive dictatorships.
I want to slow the pace down for a second and just ask the listener to imagine this reality. We talk about the friction of learning today like it's, I don't know, a headache over a textbook or a hard exam.
Right. Inconvenience.
Yeah. But for these students, exercising the muscle of critical thinking literally meant risking their lives. So how does that level of sacrifice actually cement the intellectual chassis we're talking about?
Because that shared sacrifice fundamentally fused education with national identity.
It wasn't just a school anymore.
No, the university wasn't just a place to go get a piece of paper to make money. It became a sacred space. It was the defensive wall protecting the nation's soul. To be a student or a teacher was to be a guardian of that sovereignty.
That is incredibly powerful. But looking at the sources, there's still a glaring mechanical issue here.
Right, the scale.
Yeah, the scale. Because by the 1950s, despite all this rich, deep history of resistance, there were only about 15,000 students enrolled in higher education out of a population of 6 million.
It was still very much an elite garden.
Right. So how does that become a nationwide crop?
Well, this is where we see a massive structural reversal starting in 1959.
And we're looking at this strictly through the lens of pedagogical access.
Exactly. Objectively and sociologically. The foundation of this reversal was the one-year literacy campaign in 1961.
Right. They mobilized thousands of people to make the entire country a territory free from illiteracy.
You can't have higher education without basic literacy. So once that baseline was established, education was nationalized to make it universally free.
Regardless of race or gender or background?
Precisely. And geographically, the expansion was explosive. They went from having just 3 universities to 51 centers of higher education spread all across the island.
Which is staggering. They essentially brought the university into the factories and the agricultural centers.
Yeah. Yes. They decentralized the access. And by 1997, enrollment had grown from that original 15,000 to over 100,000 students.
And it didn't just stay on the island. They created international hubs, too.
Right, like the Latin American School of Medical Sciences.
Which was huge.
Very huge. By 2002, they were managing 1,000 fellowships for international students.
So what does this all mean? If we step back and look at it, it's like taking this tiny walled-off garden and essentially terraforming the entire island into a nationwide crop of critical thinkers.
That's exactly what it was. It's a masterclass in professional formation.
Yeah.
This structural reversal was really the culmination of that whole 300-year project. They finalized the intellectual chassis.
To the point where, 1 out of 7 workers held an advanced degree?
Exactly. They successfully made knowledge a ubiquitous tool for collective freedom, rather than just a privilege for the elite.
Which is incredible.
Yeah.
But this brings the whole 300-year journey directly to the listener's doorstep today.
It really does.
Because if entire generations fought and bled just to have the right to think and learn, what are we doing right now with our access to infinite information in the age of AI?
It's a very pressing question.
I like to think of it as the concept of the exoskeleton versus the muscle.
Okay, break that down.
So AI and modern technology, they act like a brilliant exoskeleton.
Right.
Right? They give us speed, they organize our sources, they do a lot of the heavy lifting.
Right.
But the muscle inside that suit must always be human curiosity.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we really need to issue a sort of anti-delegation warning here.
An anti-delegation warning. I like that.
Yeah, because while technology absolutely accelerates our results, you simply cannot delegate thinking the ideas.
You can't outsource your own brain.
No. True learning requires thinking friction. It's that difficult, often uncomfortable effort to doubt a premise, to analyze the context, and to synthesize your own understanding.
If we let the exoskeleton do all that heavy lifting,
Yeah.
the muscle of our critical thinking is going to atrophy.
Exactly. And when that happens, we lose our own intellectual sovereignty all over again.
So to quickly recap this incredible journey, we started in this dogmatic vault of Latin.
Right.
Then we saw Father Varela open sourcing philosophy into Spanish. We saw students literally dying for the right to dissent.
And then that massive structural reversal.
Yeah, creating a nationwide crop of pedagogical access. It proves that education isn't just a system, it's a deeply personal mission.
It is. And I want to leave the listener with a final lingering thought to just sort of mull over today.
Go for it.
Think about Father Varela. If he were sitting right next to you today, watching how easily we can summon all this information on our screens, but seeing how rarely we actually sit in the friction of wrestling with it,
Yeah.
what would he say is our new Latin?
Wow.
What is that invisible barrier keeping you from doing the hard work of thinking today?
That is a brilliant question. Is it convenience? Is it distraction? We really encourage you to exercise your intellectual muscle today. Find that friction. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive into the sources with us. We'll catch you on the next one.